As we withdraw from Iraq the past 2 years ago, and as we plan to withdraw from Afghanistan in the next year, we are now faced with the third war at the American front. A war that's not fought with guns or ammo, but with a computer and a keyboard. In fact, by passing today's piece of legislation, we're making sure that each and every one of our secrets that the United States government has, not only with its workers, but also online, is going to be more secure. So I urge each and every single one of us here to vote in the affirmation for the following 2 reasons. That first, with the higher increase of cyber terrorism, it's important that we update our standards. And the second being that we're not going to have to just fire so many people as Representative Cohen has stated. So first, let's discuss exactly what we're going to be doing with the implementation of today's piece of legislation, and that's going to be updating our security code that's helping us in the long term. Now, we can see from the Washington Post on March 3rd, 2011, when it talks about the increased cyber terrorism that the United States has experienced over the past few years. Now, we see that China, Russia, and Iran are all trying to get the delicate secrets that the United States military, as well as the United States Department of Defense and Secretary of State also have. So because of this, we've seen the sites already taken down numerous times because of these attacks. And these attacks will continue to happen and continue to rage on to our constituents. But the only way to solve this problem is to continue to beef up our security and our cybersecurity. By passing today's piece of legislation, what we're incentivizing to do is reclassify all the information like Representative Phelps has stated, thus making it a lot more difficult for all those other nations to gain our security in the first place. Now, Representative Freud, you were so concerned about cyber terrorism that you should vote in the affirmation of today's piece of legislation. Because when a vote in the affirmation is cast, we can find out that we're going to be beefing up the security system because we're reclassifying the information, thus less people know about it, thus less people can actually gain the information in the first place. Next, let's talk about how we're going to deal with this situation, and it's unlike what Representative Cajotes is proposing. We're not simply going to be firing all the people, or at least 50% of them. Now, obviously, Representative Cajotes and I have one common goal. We don't want to increase those unemployed, but we want to make sure that each and every one of our constituents are safe. So by passing today's piece of legislation, we're just going to re-end how we're going to progress as a country in the future. Essentially, by passing today's piece of legislation, we're going to be more careful who we're going to hire. In fact, we're only going to be hiring half as many in the contractors, and that's a great thing, because we don't need all the information to be continued spewing out as the Edward Snowden links reduce over and over again will not happen in the future. Now we can see by passing today's piece of legislation, Representatives, we're not going to be just blanket cutting 50% of the jobs. No, we're going to be strengthening the security of the United States. And because of that, as well as the factor that cybersecurity is going to be on the rise in the next few years, it's important that we affirm today's piece of legislation. Let's look to the third front, the cybersecurity war, which makes it adamant that we affirm today's piece of legislation.
Representative Grimmett, 7 seconds. Questioners, please rise. Let's see. Representative Cajotes and Muehlbach.
Given that in Section 3 it tells us the number of people who are contracted by the U.S. with the aforementioned security access shall be reduced by 50%, how would we do that without firing them?
We just don't hire as many people when we hire for new
Our
contractors.
current amount. How would we reduce that by 50% without firing anybody?
Because the contracts aren't necessarily needed to be done by as many people as they are.
So we hire people.
Yes, but it's not like they're being fired from their jobs. They're being fired from what's actually happening with security breach.
They're being fired from the job.
They're going to be replaced at a different job where they can be better used.
Building off that, Representative, does the United States currently just hand out security clearance?
As we can see by Representative Phelps, with 4 million people, it seems like we seem to do.
So, Representative, can we assume that the security clearance is essential to them doing their job?
Well, no, because what we need to do is make sure that only the people who need to know
why would someone have security clearance if they don't need it for their job?
Because we want to make sure that every person is secure, but we need to
why would they have clearance if they
sure.
don't need it?
Please let me answer your question. We need to make sure that only the people who need to know the information for that specific job get that information. Thank you.
Thank you. Non-speakers, please rise. Representative Science.
That's Representative Jacob Dyer from Untitled Chapter speaking for the second time today. legendary German-born architect Mies van der Rohe is very famous for telling us that we find the devil is in the details. He originally used this expression to explain his disgust with the ornamentation that was traditionally used in that era's architecture, explaining that although superficially beautiful, they had no structural integrity and provided no actual internal beauty to the structures which they were on. Now, in this same way, the devil is in the details of the piece of legislation we have presented, as superficially, of course, it is a good idea to help our nation with cybersecurity and with espionage problems, but the actual implications and details that make up the bill provide us with a reason to negate. Now, more specifically, the bill claims that the only way that we are going to reduce our problems currently with cybersecurity and espionage is simply by reducing the number of people that have access by this information by 50%. Now, yes, this is a good start. However, there are a few problems with the arbitrary number. Now, the first one has not been pointed out by anyone on the affirmation yet as to explain specifically why we need to reduce 50% of these people. It could be 25%, it could be 30%, but there's been no explanation specifically as to why we need 50% of those people gone. Now, beyond this, there are a lot more situations and enactments that need to be put in place in order to actually reduce the number of espionage problems and cybersecurity problems that we have in the United States. Now, the first one was pointed out by the Director of Security Clearance Administration in January 2013, when he explained that the United States security clearance system still lacks a two-man buddy system. Now, although it sounds like a kind of system that would be enacted at a child or a beach's pool party, it is one that's important for our national security as well. Very simply, the system says that when people are given sensitive information, they will only be given half of that information. The other half will be given to an undisclosed person, and then at the time that information is needed, they will both give their information together in a similar report. This way, no singular person has specific sensitive information that could jeopardize the integrity of our country and our national security. Further, he explained that the system is just like any sort of two-key system that was traditionally used to prevent any sort of nuclear warfare, or the accidental setup. It takes the responsibility and the possibility of just one person from setting off some sort of national security problem. Now, the report went on to explain, and this was also reported by Slate Magazine in the same month, that another major problem with the national security system is that there's too much inter-branch, intergovernmental communications. They explain that different branches are communicating through non-secure email systems, even something like Gmail, when they are talking about sensitive information. Now, the reason why is because many of these employees are with the Department of Health or the Department of Homeland Security and do not have the security clearance, but when they discuss or need to mention these sort of sensitive information, they're not left with any secure government email or system to use. This has been the source of numerous hacks, as it was explained by Slate. So, Representatives, today I urge you to vote in negation of today's legislation, not because we don't need to combat cybersecurity and espionage, but simply because the legislation provided us here today is not a holistic enough approach to solving the problem, and because the arbitrary number of a 50% reduction in employees is useless to us.
Thank you, Representative. 3 minutes and 3 seconds. Questioner, please rise. Senator Waldera and Ranganani.
Thank you. Wouldn't your buddy system potentially double the amount of people with access to high information?
It wouldn't. We could have the same number of people currently, and then information just be spread out, since we are trying to reduce the number.
Well, if it's the same number of people currently, then wouldn't we have to fire half of them?
No, you could spread the information. Let's say I currently know a lot about nuclear weapons, and NAFA currently knows a lot about biowarfare weapons. He could start from now on, from this point on, half the information will be split with me and half will be split with him. There would still be the problem, of course, of me knowing the original information, but there's really no way to reduce that unless that person
is fired.
No,
so,
if they're fired, they still know the information. Now they're just going to want to start.
Regardless, their access of many people, does this bill, or how would you change the structure so that people aren't gaining access to information that they should be gaining access to?
It's very hard to indiscriminately decide who are we not going to give the information to, because as has been explained by most of the people in today's debate, lots of people need access to it. Rather, we should be providing more secure provisions to reduce the number of people that actually have the chance to speak out about that information with the enactment of a buddy system or a more secure intergovernmental email system.
Who's to say that buddies can't just get together and decide to share that
Well,
information?
they wouldn't be the buddies.
Thank you, Representative. Pro speakers, please rise. Senator Ranganani.
Once again, Mr. Representative Ranganani. Please just look up whenever you're ready. discussing this bill here today for 4 or 5 seconds. However, what we haven't even discussed is one huge component of this bill. And that is, I ask you to turn attention to Section 3, lines 11 through 14, where this bill specifically targets the question of employees cheating on their proficiency tests. Now, this bill has centered a lot on the reduction of employees. However, this bill does far more than that by combating the issue of cheating. Now, Representative Dines before me came back and said that this bill only targets the issue by reducing employees. Representatives, this bill is extremely successful because it goes beyond just that. It actually targets how these employees are being structured by the proficiency tests. Now, according to New York Times on January 15th of 2014, the Air Force said that 34 officers responsible for launching the nation's nuclear missiles had been suspended and the security clearances revoked for cheating on monthly proficiency tests. Rather, what we see is people with access to nuclear warheads are cheating on their proficiency tests. This is an inherent flaw in the system that this bill seeks to address and does address. This bill increases the penalty for cheating on these tests so that more people will be encouraged not to cheat on these tests. This will solve the problem of those who have access to information. We can see that people who are not cheaters and who are more morally correct are gaining access to this information by ensuring they can be proficient in this material. That is what this bill seeks to do. Furthermore, there is an inherent problem in the contracting system, and the buddy system would not solve this problem. Now, according to the U.S. Government Accountability Office, as far back as September 2010, in 2007, the Acquisition Advisory Panel found that the increased use of contractor employees in the government workforce to support the evaluation of other contractors suggested the problem of a conflicting special interest. If one group of contractors is evaluating another group of contractors, where is the government's input in ensuring that these contractors are actually supporting the system? Now, by ensuring that the government is forced to reduce the number of contractors or employees by 50%, we will be able to gain increased control over who will stay in the system. Now, Representative Zions came up here and mentioned that it would be easier to take the burden off of one person and split the group. However, because of the huge presence of contract workers, we see that there's automatically a risk to security because contractors are evaluating contractors. And this system can be solved by forcing the government to reduce the number of employees. Representative Cahodes before me mentioned the arbitrary cuts. However, Representative, these cuts aren't arbitrary. They're dealing with the problem of the fact that special interest groups are evaluating other special interest groups and not just the government. This bill seeks to do more than just randomly decreasing employees as the negation suggests. What it does is it controls who gains access to this and forces the government to take action immediately. For these reasons, I urge you all to vote in the affirmation. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. 2 minutes and 56 seconds. Questioners, please rise. Mr. Chair. Let's see. Representative Robbie and we'll go Golden.
And you stated by cutting these federal workers, we'd be able to control the system far more. But are we able to control the thoughts of the people that were laid off?
Representative, these people aren't being laid off with their security clearances being decreased.
Okay, then what's happening to them?
They will be able to work in their jobs. This forces the government to reevaluate who needs access to that security and who should be given access to that security.
The bill itself says that we're reducing the system itself by 50%. It doesn't provide any stipulation.
Are security workers unionized?
I don't know.
If they were, and I assume the majority of them are, and we were to pass this bill, how would we be able to actually remove them from their work?
Because we're not actually removing them from their work, we're just
Isn't that what this
decreasing
bill
their
says,
security.
lines 9 and 10?
Actually, this bill says that it's decreasing the number of people who have access to that information.
And those that
not
are
that-
employed in those areas, doesn't this then cut those jobs?
What we're noticing today in the government is that more people have access to this information than
Right.
is necessary. So if we just decrease the number of people who have access, but not their jobs, we can solve the problem.
Is it safe to keep the warning sentence low?
Thank you. All current speakers, please rise. Looks like Representative Rapp.
Thank you. That's Representative Braxton speaking for the second and final time today. Like always, I stand and believe you've all been above me. Just give me any indication when you're ready.
We're
taught at a young age many things, both in school and at home. Things like eat your vegetables, be precise with your language, do your homework, and read. And frankly, it scares me that it appears that only Representative Zients, Cahotis, Goldberg, and I have actually followed those values and read this piece of legislation. Now, I know it's been a long day, but we need to actually see that when we're dealing with half of 4 million lives, 2 million innocent workers that might be laid off because of a lack of precision of language, we need to do our homework and read. That's our job, and that's why we must fail. Now, let's look at the first error in this precision of language, which is the clause that states that those with weapons of mass destruction. And the problem with that is that under the current status quo, weapons of mass destruction basically are in the hands of everyday people. According to Forbes on March 29, 2013, it states that things as simple as a gun, other than hunting rifles, because those are considered entertainment, can be qualified as a weapon of mass destruction. And in this bill, it says that anything that requires a chemical weapon, anything that is an incendiary reaction counts as a chemical reaction, which counts as a chemical weapon. That means every single military personnel who has fired a gun has had access to a weapon of mass destruction. So those 4 million people with access to weapons of mass destruction is actually a very low and conservative estimate. And now let's look towards the next part. And now Representative Feltus, you told me, and Representative Hassanin, and basically every representative in the affirmation has stated that no one's losing their jobs. But we need to look at Section 3, which Representative Cahotis has tried to show us. Now, when we look at Section 3, and I quote, the number of people employed or contracted by the United States government with the aforementioned access shall be reduced by 50%. Now, call me crazy, but reduced sounds like a euphemism for fired. And now, it doesn't say to be employed or to be contracted like Representative Hassanin would like us to believe. It's employed or contracted, past tense and present. Those are the people losing their jobs. I don't know how we can reduce a workforce without letting people go. And now, if we see that the estimate is above 4 million people who have access to weapons of mass destruction, we see that we're really putting those innocent people's jobs and livelihoods at risk. And now, because we decided not to read a bill or not to read over the bills that one of us drafted, we need to see that we cannot pass this. It would only be careless. And now, Representative Hassanin, I agree, we need to work on global cyber terrorism, but I don't understand how that correlates to a bill that focuses internally. Now, we need to see that according to CNN on May 7, 2013, the majority of attacks are committed by China and cyber hackers, none of which who work for the government. And yes, we are battling a third world war, but it's not on U.S. turf. It's not internal, this is an external issue. I don't know why we should fire half of people who can fire a gun in order to do this. So, because we must read, we must mitigate.
Thank you, Representative. 3 minutes and 8 seconds. Questioners, please rise. Representative Fergusman and Rankin Knight.
Thank you. Representative, when you speak of chemical WMDs, don't those typical examples involve things like sarin gas and not necessarily
They
guns?
do, but because of the inspecificity of the wording, it actually puts guns into that case.
Wouldn't this bill at least be the first step in curbing our bloated national security state?
I think this is a huge leap, if not off of a building, if you're calling it a step. We need to take less drastic measures than firing 2 million people at the lowest estimate.
Couldn't we fire those people and then rehire them without national security
Why would we
clearance?
put 2 million people out of jobs? Why
Then
would
we
we take
would
away
be.
2 million livelihoods? They are the people who protect our nation. Representatives want security?
Should those who are cheating on proficiency exams be allowed to continue with their security clearance?
No, I think we need to work on background checks to find people who aren't going to cheat on tests. We should find people that aren't going to be upset when we fire them, who aren't going to tell our secrets.
Who isn't going to be upset when you fire them?
I don't know, somebody who we took a background check on and found that is cool-tempered.
Representative, how do you expect the government to continue and demand unreasonable standards out of all of their employees? Will the government
I don't, but I can't continue and fire 2 million people. Thank you.
The chair would request a Kleenex, if anybody could help the chair out.
I have a Kleenex. I actually do. Oh, motion? Motion for the chair? Okay, motion for a recess.
3-minute pro speech. Pro speakers, please rise. Representative Glazer.
The judges for the second and final time today, Representative Glazer. Whenever you're ready to sing, you can give us my contact or not. If it helps, I spoke 8 in the first day. When Representative Beltis and Representative Freud stated their arguments about how we need to take this whole-minded approach as to what's going on with our security, we realized something else. That besides the fact that Representative Rapson has no idea about our anger management controls and classes, as well as the fact of how we need to look into this, we see that rather than looking at the whole scope of things, we can dig even deeper into the micro realm of this area. So therefore, when we actually take a look at what this test will accomplish and how it will help, and how Representative Zions's buddy system actually exacerbates the problem rather than alleviates it, we see this is a bill to affirm. Now first, when we take a look at the test itself and see exactly the support and the recognition it has, we see that these background checks and other forms of resolutions that the previous representative stated are not necessary. Because according to the United States Corps of Engineers, they are actually supporting this test because of the sections it has, primarily the ethics section. So rather than actually conducting the interviews that take more time, hiring these people to conduct more interviews, as well as overcomplicating the process of the situation, we simply put them into the ethics section of this test. But how this works is more complicated than actually it sounds like. While we do have questions, we also have the idea of how to monitor these. And it's the same way that many contractors are doing them now. What you do is you take the test and photocopy and make sure you know what these answers are when people try to cheat. We know that people might cheat, and that is the result of the final stipulations of this bill and why the fine is there. We are not only adding the intrinsic value of the ethical dilemma, we have the monetary value that these workers desperately need, as well as desperately value. Now, when we look upon what later the United States Corps of Engineers also stated in 2014, we say that this buddy system that Representative Zions isn't actually the system that they need or want. And in fact, it is this reallocation that Representative Hoskins stated that does serve more effective. So when we look at the Business Insider of January 15, 2014, it states the same thing. When you look at the principles of operations management and the overall hierarchy of a business or contractual obligation like we have right here, we realize something. That when you add more people into it, it doesn't help the problem. It only makes it worse. And especially in Representative Zions' case, what he wants to do is he wants to separate the tests. He also wants to separate the information, not actually going the reverse strategy of what this bill asks. Rather than alleviating how much knowledge is at the top center and how much can be exposed, he not only wants to add more people to it, he wants to add the ambiguity of what each person knows. And what we saw when Henry Ford did a study on management back in the 1900s is that when only one person has to relay his message to his workers, it already gets lost. But when two people have to relay the same message to the same workers, not only will it get lost, not only will it get manipulated, it will be misunderstood and misinterpreted, not only affecting what the workers are learning, but affecting how they conduct themselves. So therefore, when acknowledging this bill, I understand 50% isn't exactly the smallest numbers we can have. However, what Representative Hoskins stated is correct. When we reallocate them, not reduce as in fire, but reallocate as in move around in the hierarchy of business. So therefore, when looking at this bill and taking it on a micro scale, we say this is a bill to pass.
Thank you, Representative. 3 minutes and 3 seconds. Questioners, please rise. Representative Hernandez and Zients.
Where in the bill does it specify new strategies on hiring?
We're not looking for new strategy of hiring. We're looking for new strategies.
But aren't we trying to protect our future?
Yeah, but we do not want to hire. That's
So
the point
shouldn't
of
we
50% reduction.
shouldn't we want to fix our hiring system currently?
Well, part of the hiring system is actually the test that we implement. And these workers have to prove themselves.
Yeah,
what
with
we're
the
doing
test,
with this test is revamping rather than figuring out
with the test.
hiring
Why don't we
system.
test employees currently and let the ones that fail it?
We want to make sure we test employees coming in as well as later on testing employees.
Do you think that the NSA director's proposed solution of a buddy system is not more reliable than that of a Business Insider blog post suggestion?
It's not a blog post, and it's not, the buddy system isn't something that should be effective at all. It's not relaying two different messages to do two different people isn't something that's going to be effective when you need to relay that message back to your
It's
workers.
been proven in lower situations in the Army and Navy. That
Lower
it's trying to
situations,
adopt.
correct. But when we
Well,
have
the Army and
workers-
Navy still have sensitive information. It just hasn't yet been adopted by the NSA as it is proposed by the
When we take
director.
these principles and implement them into more serious situations, as we have with our NSA,
Pretty sure the Army.
Thank you. We move now to the 3-minute con-speak. Speech, not speech. That'll be Representative Urisman.
I thank the chair.
Chair, thank you.
That's Representative Urisman, U-R-I-S-M-A-N, speaking for the second and final time today. While the judges are getting ready, I spoke third. While you guys are getting ready, I would actually just like to thank my coaches, Alex Sayer, Kathir Sundaraj, and David Weston for allowing me to flourish as a congressional debater. I stand at everyone's leisure. And considering that it's my last speech, give me a look of nostalgia. I wish that when it came to a national security bill that we would be debating on, it would be about something of actual substantive importance. Just last week, we found out that the CIA, in fact, spied on Senate Intelligence Committee staff. We found out that through the prison program, the NSA is able to essentially get data on every single American in this country. I wish that we would be able to pass a bill like that. I wish. The Congress here assembled had an opportunity to overhaul our national security state, and with this bill, we have squandered an opportunity. But I digress. We have to discuss the bill at hand. And because there is an actual magic number, and it is a lot less than the 50% mentioned in this bill, and because of the fact that we rely on a certain type of intelligence that would require us to keep so many contractors, I urge a negative vote. My first area analysis is that there has been a big debate about a magic number of contractors to cut, and I have found such a number. According to Joe Davidson of the Washington Post, who writes in this year that, quote, the Pentagon's independent review after the Washington Navy Yard shooting concluded that, quote, as a starting point, the Department of Defense should seek to make a 10% cut in the number of positions that require access to materials classified as secret. So the 50% number mentioned in Section 3 of this bill is an outrageous cut to be making in our government workforce. It is the equivalent of taking a hatchet where a scalpel is needed. And because of that, and that almost alone, we should fail the bill. But I also want to talk about how our intelligence community is structured as a whole. I turn to the former CIA director, who's the acting CIA director, John McLaughlin, in an article from the Huffington Post on November 20, 2011, that, quote, the growth in military and intelligence over the last decade particularly is labor-intensive in nature. And few aspects of our intelligence work right now are not more detail-oriented. We've moved away from human on-the-ground intelligence, especially with our CIA and NSA operations, and we moved into what I would like to call the hay work, finding the needles in the haystack. That labor, whether we want to admit it or not, is laborious. It's intensive. It requires a lot of people and a lot of desks and a lot of computers. And they all require security access. We have to understand that while I would love to restructure our CIA to return to its human intelligence roots, this bill before us does not do that. Instead, it seeks to do one thing and one thing alone: to cut and cut and cut. To damage our national security and leave us at risk for another terrorist attack by cutting the amount of contractors needed to do all of this work. It's irresponsible, and that's why this bill should be negated. I stand open for questions.
Thank you. Representative, 2 minutes, 49 seconds. Questioners, please rise. Representatives Waldera and Phelps.
Thank you. Are there more than one level of security clearance?
Yes, there are two. There's sensitive and then there's classified. Although I would add that this bill does muddle the difference by actually defining sensitive as classified.
Which level has the most people in it?
I believe 60% of individuals have sensitive clearance and 40% have classified.
Then why can't we cut some from the lower level of intelligence that don't have as much valuable information?
I would love to observe the spirit of the law, but the letter of the law, the actual wording would require us to blanketly cut 50%.
Why don't you trust the NSA to be more selective than to just randomly choose 50% of the individuals to fire?
I wish I could trust the NSA to be more selective.
If we reclassify information and reformat it into other areas that they can get access to it, can't we still have people able to do the stuff on the computers and do the hay work, as you call it?
I'm very confused. I don't understand why we should reclassify and declassify important national security secrets.
Or as Representative Waldera brought up before, people that load boxes, etc., have this type of access. Why do those people need that access?
I can tell you that system administrators, for instance, when you manage a server, you have to be able to see the contents of the server. And therefore, we need to conduct security clearances.
Motion.
Yes.
Motion for a brief 1-minute recess.
Is there a second for a 1 minute recess?
Second.
Second. All in favor of a 1 minute recess, please raise your hand. We will take a 1 minute recess.
No, then.
Or Ben, maybe I just won't speak a second.
No, you will.
Thank you for coming back to order so quickly. Are there further motions?
Motion.
Yes.
Motion to untable Bill 101.
We still are currently debating Bill 301.
Motion.
Yes. Go ahead.
I move to previous question on Bill 301.
Is there a second?
Second? Second?
All in favor of previous question on 301, please raise your hand.
I'll go ahead.
2, 3, 4. Clearly, well, make up your mind. Raise your hand if you would like to previous question Bill 301. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That falls short of the 2/3. Are there further motions? Yes.
Move to table Bill.
Second.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of tabling Bill 301, please raise your hand. Clearly that passes. The chair will entertain a further motion.
Motion.
Yes.
Move to untable Bill 101.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor of untabling 101, please raise your hand. Clearly that passes. Okay. When we left off on 101, our final speech was a con speech. The chair therefore calls for a pro speech on Bill 101. Is there such a speech? Representative Roberts.
Representative Robbie speaking for the second time of today's legislative session and of the rest of the year. But I'll be back next year, so be afraid. Just give me a nod, smile, whenever you're ready. A very long time ago, the negation to Bill 101 had come up here and given you cryptic message on this cryptocurrency, saying that it is very hard to regulate, and they try to avoid the societal damages that the unregulation of Bitcoin actually imposes today. But what they failed to see is that today's legislation provides an effective solution to a litany of problems. And because of the fact that if we were to pass today's legislation, it can alleviate some of the societal damages that are occurring from the unregulation of Bitcoins right now, and that it actually ensures that there's a true way to regulate Bitcoin, I urge an affirmative ballot. Now, Representative Glazer and Representative Hernandez came before you, once again, a very long time ago, to state that banks don't want the government to associate themselves with Bitcoin, and we can't associate ourselves with the black market. But those are precisely the reasons why we have to pass today's legislation. So first, let's understand that if we don't regulate Bitcoin, we will see that illegal transactions along the black market will continue. And what we see, and the Bloomberg of September 5th of 2013 echoes the statement when citing that HSBC, the bank had to pay a fine of $1.9 billion because of the fact that they did not blatantly stop the illegal transactions of selling drugs and other illegal activities across the black market, which were being paid for by Bitcoins. So Representative Hernandez, when you state that we have to avoid the regulation of Bitcoins because of the black market issue and the economic importance that it actually places, you're entirely wrong in that assertion. It's because of the fact that the black market has such a hold over our own economy that we have to mitigate some of the damage. And the only way to do that is to start regulating it. And Representative Glazer, when you argue that banks don't want the government to associate themselves with Bitcoins, you're wrong in that assertion as well, because of the fact that banks are facing damages because the government isn't getting involved in the first place. And because we want to mitigate some of that damage, we have to affirm today's legislation. But furthermore, there's been a general consensus by Representative Hassanin that there's no true way to regulate the Bitcoin, but that's also untrue. So secondly, let's understand that today's legislation actually expands upon the current attempts to regulate Bitcoins, but does so in a collective manner. And the New York Times of March 5th, 2014 echoes the statement when citing that there are New York regulators right now that are working to regulate the Bitcoin. And other states and other regulators in other states are working to regulate them as well. So Representative Haas, I mean, your entire argument that the Bitcoin is unregulatable is wrong. And Representative Niersbach, when you argue that it's simply an international issue, you're wrong as well because of the fact that we're only regulating the flow of Bitcoins in the United States, but not on an international level. So today's legislation is feasible from a national standpoint as well. So when we take these factors into consideration, I urge an affirmative ballot.
Representative Freeman's 5 seconds. Questions, please rise. Representative Rafson and Glazer.
Representative, how can you say that the government isn't getting involved when the Further Resolve Clause says that we shall take every effort to address every problem found by these agencies?
I said that we have to get involved right now.
Okay.
That's why I'm standing on the affirmative.
And how large is the black market?
Representative Fernandez said it was pretty large, so I would go by statistics.
Do you think we actually have the ability to combat it?
Sure, that's what regulation is for.
And where's the funding or the manpower?
That's why we have all of these organizations working in coalition to actually create a collective effort to combat the issue.
You focus so much on regulation, but if that is so, why do the banks keep telling their clients not to invest in these cryptocurrencies and not to bring it to their banks themselves?
Okay, the banks are saying that, but their constituents are still doing it. So
is that why so many people in America stop buying cryptocurrencies after the banks told them?
But even if we negate today's legislation, people are still going to buy cryptocurrency.
But what's it going to do for them if they can't do anything with it?
We still can do something, and with the passage of
What can they do?
If you let me finish, I can answer your question. If we were to pass today's legislation, then we can get involved with the issue. We can make.
Thank you, representatives. Give me a moment to breathe. Okay. We move now to a con speech on Bill 101. Representative Zhang, unopposed.
Thank you. As Representative Zhang speaking for the second and final time today, CHSA, I was the fifth speaker on the second bill of that House. Bitcoin was flourishing with rising prices and extreme success until December, when Bitcoin completely crashed. I can't stand before this Congress and pass a piece of legislation that ties our economic policy to a fluctuating, unstable currency. This Congress should not do that as well, and that's why we need to negate this bill today. For the first reason that the passage of this legislation would undermine all our previous efforts at tax evasion. And this is because Bitcoin and tax havens have several similarities which are explained to us by the Michigan Law Review in October of 2013. Cryptocurrencies possess the two most important characteristics of a traditional tax haven. First, there's no jurisdiction in which they operate, so they're not subject to taxation at source. Second, accounts are anonymous. But most importantly, Bitcoins offer an advantage to traditional tax havens because it's not dependent on financial institutions such as banks. So Representative Waldera comes up and tells us that violating our own laws is a problem. And that is a huge problem. And that's what's going to happen if we pass this legislation. Because by passing this legislation, we undermine all our previous policy efforts to combat tax evasion. And you talk about how a virtual wallet will help the international world. But this virtual wallet is exactly what's going to harm the United States. Because this virtual wallet, it's what's going to allow corporations to move their funds and store them using Bitcoin because of the nature of Bitcoin and facilitating tax evasion. And I can't stand before this Congress and pass a piece of legislation that goes against all our previous policy efforts. But most importantly, we can't pass this bill today because it undermines the Federal Reserve's ability to regulate monetary policy. The International Monetary Fund on March 28th of 2012 explains the significance of the Federal Reserve's ability to regulate policy. Monetary policy is a meaningful policy tool for achieving both inflation and growth objectives because prices and wages usually do not adjust immediately in the short term. Now, let's take a look at what that means. The Federal Reserve has the ability to adjust interest rates, and they can adjust for inflation. They react to the money supply and prices. But Bitcoin is a widely fluctuating currency, and that's going to impede our Fed's ability to regulate that. So in questioning, I asked Representative Urisman, how is the Fed going to regulate this? He said the Fed doesn't really have to regulate this. But then once again, I persisted, and he's like, he didn't provide me with a sufficient answer. And so, because the Federal ability to effectively regulate Bitcoin, we can't pass this. Moreover, Representative Waldera, you talk about Bitcoin being a use for the international community, but if we pass this bill and impede the Federal Reserve's ability to regulate Bitcoin, we impede the Federal Reserve's ability to successfully stabilize our economy. As an economic powerhouse, our economy risks destabilization. We risk destabilization of the entire global economy. And I'm not going to let this Congress be held accountable for that. And none of you should as well. So let's take a look at this piece of legislation today. Now that we understand that Bitcoin is a fluctuating currency that's going to affect our Federal Reserve's effectiveness, we can't pass this bill today. Let's continue.
Thank you, Representative. 3 minutes and 5 seconds. Questioners, please rise. Representative Zients and Cahoots.
Is the Federal Reserve the only body that's going to attempt to regulate these cryptocurrencies?
No, but the Federal Reserve does regulate monetary
Okay,
policy.
so what about the NSA, the Securities Exchanging System, the FBI, and those other agencies that will help regulate?
Even if we try to regulate Bitcoin, the fact is Bitcoin is going to be a legitimate currency in our economy, and that fluctuation is going to impede the Fed's overall
Your speech
ability.
claimed that the Federal Reserve wouldn't be able to, but with the help of these 3 other agencies, you didn't mention which have huge experience regulating
No, but
them, would they be able
overall,
to?
the presence of Bitcoin in our economy is going to be the Fed's overall initiative.
So we agree on the wildly fluctuating value of the Bitcoin, and given that, doesn't it seem odd that companies would decide to suddenly change all of their money into Bitcoins if its value is unstable?
Sure.
So then doesn't that negate your first point?
No, not at all.
Saying that corporations would use this as a sort of tax haven if the value of the tax haven can't even be predicted?
No, these corporations, I'm saying that Bitcoin does in fact find another means of storing these money from corporations in a tax haven.
So if it fluctuates, how does that provide a safe means of storing their money?
The fact is that these...
Thank you.
Thank you.
We come down to the final 2. Is there a pro speech on Bill 101? Representative Miller.
Thank you. Should have brought a 4-leaf clover because the numbers aren't in my favor. But we'll make it. Representative Michael Miller, the second and final time today. The presiding officer is ready. The judges. After a long day's debate, perhaps it's best to end with a child's story. In order to see why we must pass this bill, all we have to do is look at the little engine that could. Because the little engine that could, even though he didn't believe he could get over the hill, tried and tried as he could, and got over the hill eventually. And this is what we must do with Bitcoin. We have to try to regulate it for 2 key reasons. And we must try to regulate it for 2 key reasons. That 1, Bitcoin, if it's ever going to succeed, is going to need government regulation. And 2, that Bitcoin actually has legitimate purposes and legitimate uses if it does in fact become regulated by the government. And therefore we must affirm. So representatives, one key reason we need to pass this bill is that Bitcoin, if it is ever going to succeed, is going to need government regulation. And this is something that has been at the crux of today's debate. This is according to the Chicago Tribune of February 28, 2014, which says that if Bitcoin is ever to become a legitimate currency, it is going to need a powerful regulator, not just the FBI swooping in whenever something goes wrong, as it did with Mt. Gox. So Representative Zhang and every single con speaker who spoke before me talked about all the negative benefits of Bitcoin, but the only reason these things are happening is because there really is no regulation as it stands. There is no regulator, whether national or international. And when we examine Bitcoin in this context, all we need to do is see that we have to try, because this bill gathers all the pertinent federal agencies together and gets them to decide what we can do with Bitcoin. What that we end up doing is up to them and up to their expertise, but we have to realize that we have to try, and therefore we must pass this bill. Now, representatives, an even more important reason we need to pass this bill is that despite what every other con speaker has said, there are legitimate uses of Bitcoin that will be unlocked once the government becomes a powerful regulator. This is according to the Washington Post of November 19, 2013, which says, for instance, direct transfers right now through Western Union are very slow and inconvenient. But with Bitcoin, because it is international, it can provide a convenient and safe way for people to provide direct transfers to other countries. So representatives, this is something that no one in this debate has brought up so far, that there actually are legitimate uses for Bitcoin. And for example, these direct transfers can help people who are sending remittances to their home countries. It can help immigrants send money to their families so that they can develop poor countries. So what we can see is that through remittances and through other possible potential benefits from Bitcoin, that there are legitimate legal uses. But these will only be realized if we enact this bill in order to see what we can do to regulate this currency. Because as it stands right now, it will remain lawless and it will remain the currency of lawless people. But if we pass this bill, we can realize that it will unlock potential for remittances, it will unlock potential for legitimate uses, and therefore we must pass this bill. So representatives, after a long day's debate, we have to realize that the simple truth is that we have to try. As a U.S. Congress, we should emulate the little engine that could. So for the previous two reasons, we must affirm this piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. 2 minutes, 42 seconds. Questioners, please rise. Let's see. Representative Zhang and Hassan.
How will remittances be beneficial when Bitcoin is subject to such fluctuation?
Representative, first of all, if we do become a regulator of Bitcoin, it will become more stable because people will start using it for more legitimate purposes. So in essence, it's actually a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that if more people begin to use it, it will become more stable.
What is the guarantee of the stability once we regulate it?
Because if we regulate it, people will realize that the government sees it as a legitimate form of currency and a legitimate form of exchange. And then, as you said, more people
So
will
if we
begin to use it.
regulate, what's going to be the economic effect?
The economic effect could be better transfers. It could be, as I said, people...
Thank you. Representative, can the Fed monitor and change the supply of Bitcoin?
No, Representative, but I don't see why that's an issue in this bill.
Can they change the price of Bitcoin?
Representative, no, it's a decentralized currency, and that's what many people see as an advantage of Bitcoin.
Exactly. So the Fed can try all it wants, but can it really regulate the currency if it can't have any
Representative,
effect
but the Fed's not the only organization mentioned in this bill. It mentions the Security and Exchange Commission, the FBI, the CIA, and really every permanent federal agency.
How does any agency other than the Fed affect the monetary system?
Well, Representative, considering that, for instance, right now Bitcoin can be used for crimes, and then...
Thank you.
Motion?
Motion.
Motion to previous question, Bill 101.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Clearly the majority of the House. We'll move now to an immediate vote on Bill 101, the resolution, bill on 15. All in favor of 101, please raise your hands. Where's the raise? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All opposed to 101? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I vote a 10 to 6. This does pass. Okay,
Motion.
further motions? Yes, sir.
Motion to untable Bill 201.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Clearly, it's the desire of the House. We move now to immediate pro speech on Bill 101. Is there a speaker? Representative Goldberg. That's not good.
The leisure of my judges, and for the last time, the leisure of my presiding officer. I'm not going to cry. For all of you English teachers out there, you may be able to analyze my tone and find it in this speech to be weary. Because at the beginning of the day, I was in ardent favor of failing this bill because of all the harms that are perpetuated by the canal. However, now that I've had time to pore over my notes, I have become aware that the only solution that is going to leave any possibility for the people and for the environment to remain in a good state is indeed to pass this bill. Because one, not only are the people going to be harmed by this bill, as multitudes of pro-speakers have said, but because secondly, the corporation, the HKND is a corrupt organization that is going to create this canal no matter what we do. We need to pass this bill. So moving on to my first area of analysis, the Smithsonian Magazine in 2014 lists the multitude of indigenous people who are going to be uprooted from their houses, uprooted from their families, uprooted from their lives. Now, Representative Zions, I know that you made a large deal from the Wired magazine about all the environmental effects that are going to happen if this canal is built. And I agree with you. And this is, for example, one of the many reasons why I originally stand on the con side of this bill. However, when we look to the much more important second fact that I'd like to present to you, we will see exactly why we do indeed have to stand in proponency of this bill. Because whether or not we pass this bill, this canal is going to be made, and these evils that come along with it are going to be created. This bill is the only way that we are going to be able to fight them. Because according to the Nicaraguan Academy of Science in 2014, the HKND company was the only contractor to place a bid for this contract. Now, anyone that knows a contractor, that is a contractor, understands how these large infrastructure programs work, is that a multitude of contractors will place a bid to get this job. What we can see, though, here, and what we can see from Representative Zing's acknowledgement of the corruption of the government earlier, is that this deal was corrupt from the beginning. It was a deal that is going to allow this corporation to create this canal and to take advantage of the multitude of people that are going to be there. The environment will be destroyed. The people will lose their homes. The only thing that we can do is to pass this bill and to provide the large amounts of money to help these people and to aid the people. Now, to move on to a couple reputations, Representative Zients, you said we should fail this bill because it harms the environment. But because the environment is going to be harmed regardless, we have no choice but to pass this bill and try to mitigate the damages. Representatives on the pro side, Miller, Ravi, Zhang, and every other pro speaker that said this is going to create jobs, this is going to foster global trade. You are correct, but again, you have oftentimes overlooked the people whose lives are going to be uprooted. But because that's happening anyways, we have no choice but to pass this bill. So it is with a heavy heart and a somber attitude that I urge for you to pass this bill, because it is only by passing it that we are going to be able to preserve even a shred of the lives that once were in this country.
Thank you, Representative. 2 minutes and 59 seconds. Questions rise. Representative Waldera and Rapson.
Why would we not try to get involved earlier to prevent this disaster from happening?
I don't know why we didn't get involved earlier, but regardless of what we do now, this project is going to move forward. It's all we can do to try to mitigate the damages.
Okay, is there anti-American sentiment within the Nicaraguan government?
Within South America as a whole, there definitely is, but we're trying to help those people and preserve their environment, something they shouldn't be fighting.
Why do you believe giving money to the Nicaraguan government, given their corruption, why do you believe that the money will make it to the people?
Yeah, I have no guarantee that the money is going to make it to people, but I
Why
can
would it
guarantee
make
that no one is going to help them or even to try to unless we pass this bill.
So let me just make sure I'm on your train of thought.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to happen anyways. The government's corrupt. We might as well give it a shot.
Yes.
So why wouldn't we actually take a shot with different legislation that could stop the building of the canal? protect
There's
the
nothing we
citizens?
can do. The government has already signed a contract. The contractor has already committed to building this
We're
canal.
going to put sanctions on Nicaragua?
And what are they going to do? Continue to trade with China? They have more trade with China than with America. And as Representative Waldera said, they already are not fans of
if
America.
China's already the
Why should
biggest
we even
power?
try? Because I want to preserve the lives of these people whose lives are being torn apart.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Goldberg. Motion. Yes. Who said that? Representative Callaway.
I move to previous question, Bill 201.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Assuming affirmation, we move to an immediate vote on Bill 201. All in favor of Bill 201, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All opposed to 201? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's good. It works out. Okay. Further motions?
Motion?
Yes.
Motion to untable Bill 301 and move it to previous question.
So done, just because of where we are. We will now vote on Bill 301, just because we need to vote on it. All those in favor of Bill 301, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All opposed to Bill 301, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. No? Okay. Clearly that bill does fail.
Motion.
The chair asks for a final motion.
Motion.
Representative Goldberg.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Give them a hand.